Great, let's get it started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. My name is Minkyu Shin. I'm an assistant professor working at City University of Hong Kong. I'm really excited to share my current research, consumer voice with large language models, evidence from complaint data in the finance industry. This is a joint work with Jin Kim, a postdoc at Northeastern University, and Ji-Young Shin, a professor at Yale School of Management. So let's begin with my personal observation. After the release of ChatGPT, I received so many emails, always starting with, I hope this email finds you well. Oh my gosh, so many. And not just that, students started to send the email well-polished, so easy to understand, so well-crafted. So that makes me wonder, okay, students who might have some language barrier might use ChatGPT to polish their email so teachers can understand better. So basically facilitating the communication between humans. So after observing this, my co-authors and I started to wonder whether we can find the same thing for the communication between consumers and firms. Consumers also have some language barrier, either English or some lack of domain knowledge. So maybe consumers can also use ChatGPT to write a better complaint so that firms can understand what they are frustrated about. So we specifically focus on the finance industry because consumers often lack some domain knowledge or sometimes they don't know how to articulate their frustration. Okay. But so there are a couple of issues that we need to handle. First, adoption. So according to the Pew Research Center, only 18% of Americans have ever used ChatGPT in 2023, surprisingly low, right? And 1 year after, it just goes up to 23%. So what's the point? Even if ChatGPT has a potential to facilitate the communication, what's the point if consumers do not use it, right? So we need to understand whether they started to use it, how many of them use it, right? So we're gonna tackle this issue pretty soon. And also the efficacy. Even if they use it, does it really guarantee writing effective complaints? Why? Because using ChatGPT effectively and widely requires some domain knowledge. Prompt engineering becomes so popular because we need to train ourselves to use it wisely and effectively. Also, consumer needs some domain knowledge to screen out the output from ChatGPT. So it is not so clear whether ChatGPT always increases the chance to write better complaints. Motivated by this, we actually come up with these 3 research questions. In the finance industry, where many consumers are less literate, are consumers really using large language model in their complaints? Basically, adoption. Second, does this usage increase the chance to get relief from firms? Basically, efficacy. Third research question, what's the underlying mechanism behind this increased efficacy? So basically, we are trying to tackle these 3 research questions by employing mixed method approach. So we're gonna analyze consumer complaints from the CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and we made a couple of interesting observations, and we are trying to corroborate this finding from experimental studies. Okay? So let me walk you through this amazing data. CFPB consumer complaint data is well suited to answer our research question. Why? Because it is large scale, historical, and detailed. The number of observations in our study is more than 1 million over a roughly decade, and it contains very detailed information. For example, this one. This is just one single data point in our sample. What we can observe is the text, consumer text, what they are complaining about. Not just that, we can observe how firms actually respond. Firms can choose among these 3, they can just explain the issue and walk away. But sometimes they actually provide some relief, either monetary or non-monetary relief. So we're gonna use this variable as a way to quantify whether this complaint was successful in appealing their issues. And also we observe the location of the consumers so that we can use many different socio-demographic variables from AC as survey data. However, what is lacking in this data is that we don't know whether consumer actually use it or not, right? How do we know that? So basically, we use the AI detection program this commercial program called Winston AI is one of the frontier and state-of-the-art to detect whether the text is written by any kind of large language model or human. So using this program, we analyze each 1.1 million complaint, and we get human score indicating whether it is more like AI or human. So from now on, I'm going to call likely AI if this human score is less than or equal to 1%. If it is higher than 95%, I'm going to call it likely human. So let's dive into the first research question. Have consumers used large language model when writing their complaints? Basically, adoption problem. What do we find? So from more than 1.1 million complaints, I'm going to show you model-free evidence about the adoption. So x-axis is time, broken down by year, month, and y-axis is the percentage of likely AI complaints. What do we find? So this red dotted line indicates the time when the ChatGPT was released, and before the release of the ChatGPT, as you can observe, the percentage of likely AI complaints is almost zero. But not exactly zero because this detection program is not perfect, basically like some false positive. What about after? After the release of ChatGPT, the percentage of likely AI complaints started to increase very rapidly, up to almost 12%. And we conducted a lot of statistical tests to check whether this is statistically significant. And indeed, we find that it is very likely that consumers have begun to use large language model when writing their complaints. Okay, basically adoption. And you can ask, hey Minkyu, what's the big deal? We use ChatGPT all the time, but what about the efficacy? Did the use of large language model really help consumers get relief? What we can do is this. So we have two different groups, likely human and likely AI, right? We can compare the outcome, the response from the firms, and what we can observe is that likely human complaints has 40% of the receiving, 14% of probability of receiving relief, and likely AI complaint, it goes up to roughly 50%, and this difference is statistically significant. And we can control many different things, but still, this increase remains valid. However, this represents just correlation, not causal relationship, right? We need to understand whether this is causal or not. So to do that, we need some instrumental variable which affect the LLM adoption, but not directly affecting the relief decision. What do we have? We use the internet access from ACA survey data. Basically, we can observe, okay, for this particular zip code, how many households do have internet access? We argue that this may be affecting the LLM adoption directly, but after controlling all kinds of socio-demographic variables, this would not directly affect the relief decision. And second instrumental variable that we use is language barrier. We can observe within that zip code how many of them actually speak English fluently. So what do we find? This is a first stage regression, basically checking whether this IV actually explains some variation in terms of LLM adoption. As you can observe here, if the complaint is coming from the region where lots of households do not have internet access, the complaint from that region is less likely to be written by AI. And second row actually indicates that if the complaint is coming from the region where lots of households do not speak English fluently, then the chance to classify this complaint as likely AI actually goes up. Pretty intuitive, right? And using this result from the first stage regression, we can actually check, okay, after controlling some potential endogeneity issue, whether we can find some positive correlation between likely AI and relief decision. So we find indeed, after controlling the residual from the first stage, which captures some potential endogeneity, we still find that, okay, if the complaint is classified as likely AI, then firms tend to give relief highly likely. Okay? So we also corroborate this finding through lab experiment. We selected 20 likely human complaints, and then we generate a counterfactual AI version of this complaint. And we randomly assign this complaint to human participant in the prolific. And human participant, after seeing this complaint, if you are handling the complaint above, how likely would you be to offer monetary compensation to address this complaint? From 1 to 7. What do we find? So this is a compensation likelihood rating. As for the human complaints, unedited human complaint, it has the average 2.8. And if it is additive with large language model, it goes up to 3.5. And this difference is statistically significant. So all in all, what we find is that, okay, we have two pieces of evidence, one from observational study and the other from experiment. We find that consumers who use ChatGPT tend to be treated better by firms. So basically, efficacy. It is very likely that the use of large language model indeed increases the likelihood of obtaining relief. Let's move on to the third research question, the mechanism. How can the use of large language model increase the likelihood of getting relief? So here we propose that linguistic feature alignment can be one potential mechanism. So let me walk you through this mechanism. So let's say consumer complaint handler value clarity. However, in this market, consumers do not know how to write clear complaint. So obviously, it is not aligned. So the chance to get relief is relatively low. However, if consumers start to use ChatGPT, hey, ChatGPT, can you make it more clear? Then it is aligned. So the chance to get relief gets higher. But we propose further is as follows. Hey, ChatGPT, can you make it more coherent? Can you make it more professional? Even in that condition, we find alignment. Why? Because large language model incidentally improve many different linguistic features all at the same time. Clarity, coherency in the human language is very correlated, right? So even if consumers do not ask, hey, ChatGPT, can you make it more clear? Instead, can you make it more coherent? Can you make it more professional? LLM thinks that, hey, you may lack some clarity in your complaint, so that LLM simultaneously improves multiple linguistic features all at the same time. Same goes for the different types of complaint handlers. So the bottom line here is that the chance of satisfying unknown linguistic preferences of the receiver increases when we use large language models. So we test this hypothesis in the lab experiment. So basically, we ask half of the participants were told to focus on professionalism, and the other half focused on clarity. So what do we find? So indeed, we find that, okay, clarity condition, we find statistically significant higher relief likelihood. And not just that, even for coherent condition and professional condition, we find a substantial increase. Same goes for the other group. And this difference is meaningful in a sense that it goes from 3.3, and so baseline is roughly 3.3 out of 7, but this difference, this improvement, can be a game changer moving to over 4. Okay. And let me, yeah, why not? Do I have more time? Yeah, great. So you may wonder, okay, ChatGPT can just improve the quality of the complaint, right? But we find that, okay, only for those complaints who incidentally improve in terms of the focal linguistic feature, we find a higher chance to get relief. But otherwise, the same improvement does not happen. So basically, just using ChatGPT itself would not guarantee the higher quality of complaint. Only those complaints who observe the incidental improvement gets a higher chance to get relief from the human participant. Okay. So let me quickly conclude. We investigated 3 questions. Basically, first one is adoption. Do consumers use large language model in their complaints? Yes, we find that this hockey stick graph actually tells us that it is very likely that consumers started to use ChatGPT. Second, do large language model enhance message persuasiveness? And we find that yes, and it could be causal. We use instrumental variables such as internet access or language proficiency in our observational study, and we also corroborate this finding with the lab experiment. And lastly, what could be the mechanism, linguistic feature alignment, such as we have two different routes of communication in human communication, right? Like a central route and peripheral route. And we argue that linguistic feature can be one potential mechanism behind why ChatGPT or large language model can improve human communication. So it has multiple implications. First one is empowering consumer communication. So firms need to consider integrating large language model power channel to help consumers articulate their needs more effectively, because it reduces some communication friction, misunderstanding, and ultimately increasing loyalty. And it also has some implication that, okay, before the ChatGPT era, we do not understand some consumers, their frustration, but thanks to ChatGPT, they start to speak so that we can understand some neglected consumer segment or overlooked issue, so it gives us some chance to develop a new market. And last but not least, here I focus on the sender side, but the receiver side, like the firm, they need to understand that firms, consumers start to use ChatGPT. How do we actually evaluate those complaints assisted by ChatGPT? It's a great time to think about how you train your customer service teams to fairly evaluate AI-assisted complaints. Okay. That's all I have for today. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any question, please let me know. Thank you.
Questions?
Hi, again, Ana Valenzuela from Sade and Baruch. Great presentation, all of the three, by the way, amazing. Now, it would be interesting to see what does the person that writes the complaint feels. So if they can use an LLM, do they actually feel more relieved from the frustration? That's one question. Is that something that you guys were able to measure? Because if you express yourself better, you may also feel more empowered.
We haven't checked that emotional reaction coming from the fact that I actually use ChatGPT, but that can be very interesting extension.
And the second question is, are there any linguistic characteristics that change? Like word counts, number of verbs, number of I, and personalness.
Yeah, in the interest of time, I actually removed that slide, but basically we can find some meaningful difference between likely AI complaints and likely human complaints, but mostly from some peripheral route. That's one of the reasons why I developed that, okay, that's not about like a central route, it's more about peripheral route. Like we can apply many text mining method to measure, okay, sentiment, politeness, readability, and etc. But we find that in observational study, these kind of linguistic features that we can measure from the computational linguistics improve all at the same time. So that's why we developed this kind of linguistic feature alignment hypothesis. But yeah. Yes, please.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I just had actually two questions. So first, I think your IV assumes that internet access is unrelated of the consequences, outcomes for the complaints. But I also wonder if the region is associated with the extreme type of complaints that they may have. So say if I'm a very spoiled customer, even a tiny little dissatisfaction in service will cause me a complaint and my English kind of is perfect. But this complaint will be denied because it was pretty much not based. But maybe people with a low language of English, they only complain in very extreme cases, and those are indeed will be more likely to be satisfied. So there might be correlation between the outcome and people.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question? I think it is important, yeah.
No, I'm just saying that I'm not quite sure that there is no correlation between the outcome and the access to internet. That those people, they might be actually complaining only in extreme cases that will be more likely to be satisfied due to some psychological and economical reasons and type of issues. And second, I think you emphasize coherence and clarity, but I think like a very important driver in this complaints is also emotional component. When you say I'm extremely dissatisfied, this is how we define complaint, right? But I think it stays undeclared and hidden in the effects of clarity and cohesion in your analysis. So it would be nice to see that separated out.
Yeah. As for the first research, the question, which is great, in the end, it's gonna boil down to whether you believe this argument, whether this is a valid instrument or not, right? So we believe that, okay, after controlling all kinds of other socio-demographic variables such as income, wealth, education, internet access would not directly affect the relief decision. That's one thing. Of course, it can be debatable. But also, when we actually use deep IV, basically we capture all kinds of complex relationship. Still, we find that, okay, this relationship can be causal. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, so what I want to say is that maybe instead of just looking at the outcomes, you could also see if the problems are randomized. Because if within the zip codes the problem are non-random, then the outcomes are also non-random.
What they're complaining about.
Yes.
Oh, that's a good point. I'm going to check that out after this talk, yeah.
One more question?
Yeah.
How much the likely AI is reliable? I use those types of technology to check my students' report is written in AI or not. Wow, the result was not that satisfactory. So, so you set the threshold value of 0.1, 0.01, and 95 percentile for the likelihood score. So do you think it is satisfactory or not?
So first thing is that this is just based on some statistic, but whether we choose a different threshold, like a 99% or something else, it does not change so much qualitatively. That's one thing. And also, and we also check, in the interest of I actually skip, but we also check whether our result also holds when we use a different AI detection program, such as Originality AI, which is another frontier commercialized program. Yeah.
All right, so thank you.